Hey guys, welcome to what will likely be the first episode of the Gray Matter Health podcast. Thank you for being here. At this point, if you're listening, you're probably already my friends or family, so really appreciate the support. I am trying something new on this year, which is to practice talking to my camera for a really long time, but also practice being myself online, which is something that I've really struggled with. I guess to back up a little bit, I'm Michelle, and for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been a health coach working one-on-one with people on refining their nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress management strategies so that they can just feel more comfortable being in their own bodies and living their life. And what I really love about this job is that I get to be myself, but also learn about who people really are. My favorite part isn't giving education to my clients. In fact, I don't really do that too much at all, but rather just learning about their lives, their backgrounds, their struggles, and being in a situation and a circumstance where people really do trust me and open up to me. I think that is such an honor and privilege to be in that position, to get to know someone's life and be a part of helping them improve it. With that said, a part of this is the fact that I now own a business and I have to attract people on a larger scale and explain what I do on the internet. And that part has been honestly very frustrating for me because trying to go through this process of learning how to create content for social media, learning how to market and sell myself, it's never felt super authentic. I've never been able to watch something that I've created and say, hey, that sounds like me. And it almost feels like a misrepresentation of myself, unintentionally, but partially because of the time limits and the structure limits of making really short reels or image posts, kind of trying to fit myself into a certain mold that I think is appropriate or that other people told me would get more views. So I would much rather have time and space to get more into the details, have a real conversation with you, and let my audience have a chance to get to know me as a person and what it's actually like to talk with me, not like the fancy, scripted, minor details honed specifically for the internet version of me, but actually me. I really want to practice putting myself out there in a way that is very similar to if I was just to sit here and have a conversation with my friend, because that's what people really need to know about working with someone in this capacity is if you're gonna be wanting to work with me in the future or wanting to talk to me, you should know who I am, because the most important thing isn't my background or my video production talent or my credentials even, but the most important thing is that you can relate to me and I can relate to you, and we both feel like we're nice people who can get along. So with that said, today I figured that the best thing to do would be to introduce a little bit about myself. And I do have some notes here that I'm gonna pull up just so I can reference for my own needs if I really get derailed and I forgot what I was supposed to say. But they're very short, so I'm just gonna try to ad-lib everything, and I'm gonna try my best to just sound like I am speaking to someone. So in order to get to know me and why I'm doing what I'm doing, I think the first thing is that you'd have to know who I was in the past. All of us have these, I would say, foundational experiences where one thing happened to them that changed the course of their entire life. And for me, the first one of those experiences was all the way back in middle school. So the first thing you should know about me is that I was a very shy kid, but I cared a lot about my friends. I would almost consider myself an extrovert in that the most important thing in my life growing up was actually these few core connections I had with other kids my age. Even though I was very quiet, I was not wanting to be the center of attention, but looking back as an adult, what I realize is that my best memories are all playing with my friends on the playground, being with other people. I didn't really enjoy being alone that much. So, what happened to me in middle school really changed the course of my life because it forced me to basically be alone for many, many years. And I shouldn't say forced, but it kind of put me on that path. So let me tell you how it started. I don't remember any of the details because it was just so long ago, but I was happy, normal kid in middle school. But then I was hitting my tween years where girls at my public school in Colorado started grouping up into cliques and being mean to each other and all the things that young preteen girls do. And for some reason, I got wrapped up in some drama. I think it really came to a peak when I started a little blog. It was back in the day of LiveJournal and Blogger and Zanga. I started a little blog site and I wrote something mean about another girl in my class just because one of my friends egged me on. And that girl was also a part of the group of friends, a core group of friends who I hung out with. And oh my gosh, I'm starting to sound like a middle schooler again, just reciting this story. But I don't know what happened. At the end of it, I did something bad. They got revenge as a result. And I ended up pretty much friendless, like by the end of middle school, because of just how things turned out. A lot of gossip, a lot of shaming from the group, and I ended my middle school career just completely alone. Didn't feel like I had any friends or support. Everything blew up in my face. It was probably my fault to some extent, but honestly, really don't remember any of the details. The important thing is, I was so upset about everything that happened that I convinced my parents to transfer me to another school district for high school. So I actually ended up going to a high school that was almost half an hour away from the middle school that I went to, just so I could avoid these people, which I know is ridiculous. But when I started high school, I'd already internalized all these messages about myself from that whole ordeal that I was mean. I wouldn't say mean, but I was unlikable, that I was not worthy of having friends, and that I didn't belong to the wider group. I started assuming this identity when I was about 13 or 14. And starting at this new school, I think another very important piece of context to have is I grew up in suburban Colorado as a Chinese American woman. And there are not very many Asians here. So growing up, I always was made aware that I looked different. And because I looked different, there were all these expectations that were piled on to how I was supposed to act and who I was supposed to be. As an Asian, there were so few of us that the dominant stereotype that was created by the white kids was that we were nerdy and awkward and just good at math, but really bad at socializing. So it wasn't like I was the most desirable person to befriend in the first place. So that kind of added on to my struggles is I felt like I have to fit into this like role of being a smart Asian, which I actually tried for a little bit when I was in high school. There was a group of Asian American students who I tried to hang out with for a short period of time, but I knew pretty soon that wasn't good enough for that. And what I mean is Asian American kids are usually under a lot of pressure from their parents to perform academically. Their parents are like tiger mom, on their case all the time. And for me, my parents were a little bit different. My dad was a consultant, so he usually traveled week to week, wasn't really available at home, and my mom took on basically 100% of the burden of raising us. So she was busy doing housework and also doing her job. So my parents were, as a result, unintentionally very laid back for Asian parents. So I didn't really get pressured. So I didn't get all the pressure that other kids did earlier on to succeed in school. So by the time I entered high school and I tried to follow this Asian clique and do what they did, I ended up joining things like math club and speech and debate and just these very intellectual side extracurricular activities that I didn't like and I wasn't good at. And I was almost in this really weird, sticky situation where I didn't feel intelligent enough to be a part of the Asian group, and I was too Asian and weird to fit into the white group. So I was in this zone where I decided I'm kind of inadequate for all the people around me, so I guess I'm just gonna have to do my own thing. And that's where my lone wolf streak started, where I just decided I'm not gonna make any friends, so I will no longer try. Even though it was important to me, I just couldn't admit that to myself at that point because my ego was telling me you have to protect yourself, don't want to get rejected again like you did in middle school. Just focus on your own thing. So how this ended up turning out was I didn't really have friends in high school. I was that student who just like how people group up in the cafeteria. There are all these different groups. The popular kids sit together, and then the band kids sit together, and the theater kids sit together. I got to a point where when I went through the lunch line in the cafeteria and then I just looked at all the tables, there was literally nowhere that I felt comfortable sitting. So I would take my food, I would walk to the math hallway, which was essentially in the lowest level of the basement of my high school. And there's a desk in the middle of the hallway, and I would eat my lunch there while doing my homework. It's kind of sad. It is actually very depressing, and I regret a lot of it because as an adult, obviously looking back, a lot of this was self-imposed. I was definitely not off-putting and disgusting enough that I couldn't have any friends. I just really didn't try, and I put myself into a really, really bad place for me personally because as I mentioned before, social interactions are very important to me. Social connections are very important to me. But I decided at this point, I'm not going to do that. I am not going to deal with it. I am just going to get comfortable being alone. And honestly, it wasn't all bad. I would say that a lot of who I am today was formed by that period of loneliness. And it's because I didn't worry about other students and their opinions or fitting in for many years. I instead focused on developing myself. So I worked on developing my skills, getting comfortable speaking, getting comfortable with all of my academic course load. I really started excelling in high school and college and beyond, and finding things that I was really interested and passionate about. So I really started reading a lot of books, especially on psychology and philosophy, and it taught me a lot about life, even though I didn't experience it firsthand. What else was I gonna say? Yeah. So naturally, even though I wasn't one of the smart kids growing up, at least by Asian standards, I became one of those people in high school and especially in college. So I did so well in high school that I actually ended up getting accepted into an Ivy League school for college. I went to Dartmouth. And there I had all the resources and all the ambitious peers and everything I needed to really do a deep dive into academics. And I ended up doing really well. I, of course, sacrificed my social health again. I was still pretty much friendless. I lived as a hermit in the library. My entire college career, I didn't really go to parties. I didn't study abroad. I joined very few student organizations, but I worked on a ton of cool projects. At least for me, they were cool at the time, by just waking up, going on a run, grabbing breakfast, and then spending the rest of the day in the library. I just lived in the library in college, which is really sad, but that's the truth, and that was a very big part of my formative years. I became obsessed with learning and research and succeeding in academics. The reason why I never got out of that loop until after I graduated is because I was getting so much validation from professors at this point, where I would do something, they would be impressed, and then I would feel good about myself. And because I didn't have any other avenues for external validation, for feeling like I was doing something good or important or being successful or anything like that, school became just such a sole focal point for it that I almost started wrapping my self-worth into my academic achievement. I literally had nothing else. I had no friends. My family was far away. I wasn't really good at any of my hobbies. I enjoyed running and I enjoyed cooking, but I wasn't passionate about either of those. So I would just do research projects, take really hard classes, try to land good internships, and every time I got one of those, I would feel like, oh good, I'm worth it. I'm on the right track. And sooner or later, I started realizing that I was tying my value as a person to my output. So if I could work harder, if I could produce more, then I would be happy with myself. But if something went wrong with my studies or my work, then I would feel like shit about myself. My entire self-worth was just what I was doing for others in that regard. It was mostly fine through college, but after I left college, I think I got so many more opportunities to turn into a workaholic. I don't even know if it was more opportunities, but it was just almost like more intense rewards and more possibilities, because in school you can only really do so much. You're given an assignment, you're given a project, you do your best, you get a grade, it's over. Everything is so fixed and structured. But then once I got out into the real world, it was kind of like, oh, the world's my oyster. Now I can do anything. There's always going to be so many people out there that do better than me, that challenge me, that give me the next best thing to do. So what I did was I transferred that focus on academic achievement into career. And I guess if any of you are a very career-driven person, you'll know what I'm talking about. But once you start putting your attention into career, there is no ceiling for that. You can put as much effort and time and attention into your job as you want, and there will always be more to do. If you do well, you'll get promoted, you'll get a new job opportunity, you'll get more responsibilities, you'll get to work on a harder project, you'll get to work on more projects, you'll get to work with more people, have more influence. There's no stopping. There's so many opportunities for growth that you can just keep chasing the next opportunity. And then it almost gets to a point where once you have success, it's not even satisfying. You celebrate your success for maybe a day or two, and then you're like, what's the next thing? What's the next biggest thing for me? And that was kind of how I approached life, because my whole identity as a person was still, what was I achieving? So as I continued in my journey, I put all of myself into my work, and I felt good when I was doing well at work, and I felt bad when I wasn't, like how I did in college, just at a much, much bigger scale. Financially, it served me really well. Socially, I think I actually did better in adulthood because I now got to socialize with my coworkers, and actually being on good terms with them benefited me in the long run. So I got back a lot of my social skills. I actually did have a group of friends. I started dating. That side of things was better. But me putting all my energy into work and then having higher and higher demands of myself as the years progressed, that part started to get really, really toxic. For reference, I'm in my 30s now, and I haven't realized until recently just how damaging that was to me, where I didn't spend time at all trying to find something that I liked about myself outside of what I could do, and what I did for work. So hopefully that makes sense. I essentially got into this cycle where I would, so this is how it worked more on the month to month, year to year basis. I would get into a cycle where I would get really, really invested in work or side projects or something else, pour myself into it, sacrifice my sleep, my eating, my activity. I would not take care of myself in order to get this big thing done. And then it would get done, and once I got an opportunity to rest, I would just completely crash out. I would physically get sick and then not be able to get out of bed for 5 days. It was really bad. I would push myself to the limit, burn out, rest, and then repeat that cycle over and over and over again. It was only recently that I decided, I would say 5 years ago, that I was done with it. It wasn't the lifestyle I wanted, and it was kind of my bad for choosing to take it that way. I could have had a healthier relationship with work. It wasn't in the cards for me with my personality at the time and my background and what led into it. I needed to do a lot of self-work and internal work before I could have truly had a balanced life in that environment, just because of who I was. But actually what pulled me out of that, and what brings me to what I'm doing today. So don't worry, there's a reason I'm telling this story. The reason I started getting into health coaching, despite the fact that I lived this very unhealthy lifestyle, is because fitness was what pulled me out of that cycle. I started doing CrossFit when I was 22, kind of on and off, but really started getting into it maybe in my mid to late 20s, like 26, 27. And CrossFit got me away from a work environment. What it did was it taught me, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and do things in your life that you can control that are good for you. So despite anything that could have happened, any catastrophe that could have happened at work that day, I could still know, hey, in the morning I chose to go work out. I did my best. I see it as a success. I feel good about it. And that is something that can carry me through the day. And it's something that is mostly under my control. It kind of helped me start splitting my attention between work and something else, which was very healthy for me at the time. And additionally, it was something that made me physically feel better in my own body and physically be better in my own body. So that helped a lot with my mood and me spiraling into these burnout spirals. It kind of helped prevent that. And as I got better with exercise, that kind of encouraged me to start eating right. And man, nutrition is so underrated. I know that everyone eats, everyone knows that vegetables are good for you. It's not rocket science, but once you can get consistent with the food you're putting in your body, you almost come out like a completely different person. So needless to say, it made a huge impact on my life. And that's why I initially got into health coaching, because I was like, hey, look at how I was doing before I started working on my health, and look at how I'm doing now. I feel like everyone should have that opportunity to have something that, again, they control, that they can put some of their effort into intentionally, but also design it the way that they want to. And then they can do something good for themselves on a daily basis through just having these simple, healthy habits. Like, I want to spread that around. I think everyone should have an opportunity to have that and to go through it. And that's why I initially started health coaching. With time, and only with time, I realized that that was only the surface level of it. So, what I really liked after I actually started getting to work with people was not necessarily teaching them how they can alter their diet or how they can start getting into the gym or start sleeping a little earlier, even though, yes, those skills were important and those skills did help. I realized that what I was really, really missing was just that one-to-one connection with another human being. So this kind of brings things all full circle, where I got brought back to I'm in middle school and I used to be able to trust and connect to all these girls around me, and all of a sudden they hate me. What's going on? Now, as an adult, I think for the first time, I have fixed enough of myself internally that I'm able to now open myself up to those genuine connections again with other people. And that's really important to this whole process, because in order to change anything about your life with the help of someone else, you really need to be vulnerable and bring that person in. So I'm actually very thankful that I'm able to put myself in that position where people will open up to me and I will genuinely empathize, connect, and help them out. And then in that sense, when people do succeed, it's not only, okay, I said all the right things, I laid out the right plan, because strategy, numbers, all of that stuff came from my corporate background. But the really important skill, and the skill that I've really worked the hardest on, is communication and listening. And the fact that I can put myself in a place to understand someone to the point where I can work around all of their what's going on internally in their head and externally in their busy lives, and still help them find something that's valuable to them, help them feel better in a very unique and genuine and authentic way. That is true value to me. That is what's important to me, is me rediscovering my humanity and being able to connect with others again. And that's kind of the gist of why I do what I do. Looking back, it makes a lot of sense because, at least for me, I feel like a lot of people derive their passion from some sort of pain that they experienced in the past. And the biggest pain for me was feeling alone and struggling with myself. And I see now kind of different versions of that in each of my clients that I work with. It's not necessarily to that extent, or actually even the same format or same flavor that I went through myself, but I've just really realized that everyone is kind of silently and privately struggling with something, whether it be related to their physical health or mental health or emotional health. It's very hard to tell, likely all three in some regard. But just having some space to open up, to get some support from someone else, that is so major. And that's really the reason why I'm pursuing this, and the reason why it's so rewarding for me is I can go back and relate to, I went through something, it took me a long time, I overcame it with other people's help, and now I can pass that along and do my part in reaching out to others, being able to apply my skills, but also just apply my presence as a human being to help them work through that themselves. I don't think I said everything in the order that I planned it, but just in closing, I just want to say that the biggest thing I've taken away is you don't have to be beholden to what's happened to you. Everyone goes through hardships, and the reality is those hardships, a lot of them will be with you for life. no matter what you do to try to work through them, overcome them, move past them. If something major happened that kind of veered you off track, like it did for me with just all that time I spent being very uncomfortable and very alone and having low self-esteem, you'll never completely recover from that. But the hopeful part of it is like that experience, it's probably not something that you faced alone. And that experience can be something that you grow from, and it can be something that you use to connect with others in the future. And at the end of the day, vulnerability is strength. Getting in touch with your weaknesses and being comfortable sharing your weaknesses, that's true strength and that's true authenticity. And that's going to help you in the long run much more than just trying to be stoic and strong and follow all the rules and follow this sequence of life that's been laid out for you. So in closing, I do want to explore in the future these topics of resilience and developing self-love in a lot more detail. There's a lot of things I want to talk about, but hopefully that gives you an idea of who I am, and we'll see how this podcast thing goes. Thanks for listening.